It's hard.
It really is.
Now, as time goes on, why, that might heal those things, but you know, it's kind of hard.
It
Bad
does take
enough
some
even
time.
to be like he was so long. You know, I would think
Yeah.
back, and I thought, well, it's just hard to believe Woody when he couldn't sit around and strum on some kind of an instrument.
Oh, yeah.
And he was quite a sort of a showman, and the monkey about the house, you know, when he was growing up and at home before he even went to California the first time. He ended up in New York. But
Well, now, are you're his half sister? Is that
No.
right? You're not.
no,
Somebody
that
put that
infuriates me. And my daddy
well,
did
I
not
wonder
commit suicide. And that's
That's all
come
part
out
of the
too.
legend, huh? Or part of
No, my daddy was.
the rumor that's built up.
No, in fact, that came out because I was the youngest. And when
Oh.
our mother became ill, my aunt in Texas took me and my brother that's in Long Beach and raised us for the next 5 years.
I see.
And see, the people at Okema now there are people down there that remember that there was a little girl. And then the next time I showed up, I'm grown, they said, no, he only had one sister and she was burned to death, you know. I had to fight that. In fact, I had to just stand right up and tell one lady. She just really didn't know what she was talking about.
People get that way.
Well, it didn't matter because I said, well, you can always prove those things, but my father
Sure.
did marry a woman after, I guess it was in the 30s. And then he took this brother and me back with him for the next 9 years. But they never had any children. There was not even any half brothers and sisters or anything else because she didn't have any children. Then that sort of went to the wayside, and my brother that passed away in December lived in Cornwall at that time. And I came back and lived with him and finished my last year and a half of high school. And Woody had gone, that was one of his little trips when he was going through to California. And this picture you see with burl eyes, and then there's an old Chevrolet. My brother bought that off of Woody for $50 on one of those trips. And then we had that old car. And then he came through here one time, and the picture that shows on the front of the book, Bound for Glory, was he had this old lumber jacket thing on. It was all wool. And he didn't wear it away. He left it. Well, at that time, I didn't have any use for it, you know, and it just hung around till it got sort of began to get moss in it, and I put it in room set. And I've hated myself ever since because that was the jacket that he had on in that picture. And then later, as he became better known, and they began I don't have any material things, actually, all printed matter. I have an old blue cat around here that he bought and sent me. And he had the cutest little legend. That's in Guy's stuff, too. But it's my treasure. But he didn't take the cat. He was afraid he'd break it. It's china. And I guess that's the only material thing that I have.
Did he ever write letters to any of his family? Or
oh, my goodness, yes. And I kept every one of them.
You have
See,
all
that's why I sort of, now when I say pay dirt, I don't mean money-wise, but I mean they realized, see, Woody just got separated from the family real young. When Mama, she died in Norman. You knew that. In the Central State Hospital there.
Well, I've been curious about that, if we could kind of go into that for a minute.
At the time, it was termed a nervous breakdown. That's all they knew to call it. And there was nothing ever said or thought differently until Woody became ill, the very first signs of his illness, and he could still talk. And he remembered that when he used to go visit Mama in Norman, that's exactly the way she acted. She had the same body motions, and when he goes to smoke a cigarette, he goes this way, you know, sort of jerky movement. And this hand flies, and if he gets a cup of coffee, it sloshes. And they mostly gave him carbonated drinks because he could handle the bottle better, and they had to stay right with him when he smoked because he had no muscle coordination. But his mind was real clear. And
was he able to talk up
until? Yes. I went to visit him, about 7 years ago, 5 or 6, 7. I lose track of time. Distance, time, direction, I don't ever know anything than that. But anyway, it was several years ago. I took a bus out there, and I just had the extra money and I had a little time too, and I thought, well, I'll just take the old bus. It's cheapest, and I can have more money to spend when I get there. And that was my first trip to New York, and that was the first time that I had ever met Marjorie. We had written, we corresponded all these years, but we'd never met. And it just thrilled her to death because she said, until I came, that was the first Guthrie they had ever seen, and they just thought that Woody was pulled out of a stump somewhere. We had no relatives whatsoever, you know. She was just, she's real cute. She's a real, sometime if she ever comes back, maybe she'll get the opportunity to come over. I think she would enjoy it. Because I did tell her about your program in the letter that I wrote just last week. And then Woody, on that trip, he could walk with help. We had to support him on both sides. But he could walk, and I have pictures that we took. We had to sort of sneak around and take them. I thought they were going to take my camera away and just burn it, because they said that when people get in places like this, they can go in and say we're relatives and that sort of thing, and take pictures of that type and blackmail, or you know, against people's character. So they're very, very strict. And I appreciated that, but I assured them that I really was his sister, and I hadn't seen him. I believe it was 15 years I hadn't seen him, and they sort of let me go if I wouldn't use that camera anymore. But I did get some real nice pictures. And then they had sort of a real special meeting, and this Pete Seeger was there, and all of Wood in this Cisco Houston. I met all these people, and Cisco was one of the nicest people. And he really could sing. Now, he has some nice records. You probably have them. They're nice.
Really good.
And Pete Seeger has a nice voice, but now Woody, it's hard. He just rants, rambles around. But nowhere did he sing to vocal quality. So we don't.
Really did.
No, he just sort of went from. And he just did it because for fun. Yeah. And I mean, it was just his way. But when I saw him that time, he could talk, and he thought it was funny that when you came into this ward and you looked about, the craziest looking person in there, the one that you would think was in the worst shape of all, was really the only one that had any mind at all. And all the rest of them really were crazy, but Woody was physically in his seat. But he thought that was funny because he said, I look crazier than any of them in here. And they really are crazy, you know. But he did have his mind.
Was this at Creedmoor State or?
No, Greystone.
Greystone.
Now you have a boy. I have the nicest big scrapbook, and I have everything, and it's all labeled. His guy has that too. In your town, Womack. John Womack?
John Womack. I don't guess I know him.
Well, he's from Norman, and his daddy's in the post office. David Womack. And he went to Harvard, and later went to England. He's a great fan of Woody's, and he came over here and borrowed all my stuff, just piled it in his car, just like Guy Logston has. And he kept it until he was sent to England, and his daddy brought it back, made a special trip. And he went to visit Woody in the hospital, and he came back and told me that Woody was, would really appreciate seeing some of his folks, and that's when I decided to go. And he did a lot of research, and he had been assigned Woody in one of his classes to do research in connection with music, I believe. And then I guess you saw the article last week where Woody was picked one of the 17 famous Oklahomans.
No,
Did you not see that?
No.
Now that was done by research in your University of Oklahoma. Some of your history professors were part of that. Now, I sent all that to Marjorie just last week. They posted all that stuff, and they sent me back the originals.
Was that in the Oklahoman, or do you remember?
Yes, it was. And one of those little feature things, it's right down at the very bottom. And Kerr and Mantle, Will Rogers, and Woody, and all the other so forth.
Carlisle.
Carlisle, remainder of 17. Then we got a letter and a copy of a congressional record, and Woody's obituary has been written into that, and it's about 2 or 3 pages long.
Well,
and Frank Streetman has that now. He's real sort of famous entertainer in our part who's had a stroke, and he was one of Woody's schoolmates. And all through Okima days, they all grew up over together. So when I was in the hospital, his wife came to visit me, and I sent it home with her for him to read. But
I wish you could read that. That is one of the
sure would like
nicest,
to.
and it is correct.
That
There's
is in
nothing.
the one in the congressional
Yes,
record.
sir.
I
Yes.
think that's. I think you can get copies of those things.
Yes, I'm sure you can. Now, I'll tell you who sent us ours. It's the head of the OG&E in Shawnee. And it said from the desk of, and what was his name? My husband knows.
I could probably get it from him in Shawnee.
Yes.
I don't know if I know him or not. I spent quite
But
a bit of
I
time
bet
over
he's
in
one of
Shawnee.
he's pretty high up in OG&E
Mm-hmm.
over there. And I believe he's the head of it in Shawnee also. But I really did like that article. You know, all through the years, and it came up from a little old school teacher in Okina that saw somewhere or another where Woody was one of the known communists in Oklahoma.
Oh, was that B. Dill?
No, she was not the one. Because she's been one sort of, she's staying with this work
Yeah,
and
I was
doing research.
anticipating you. Yeah.
Yes, and so then Guy Logston he is just so intent on uncovering the where and why for of that, and the well, what am I trying to say? Nowhere can they find where Woody was ever directly connected with it, other than just a figure of speech. And I think that would have come more or less out of his own way of believing and thinking, and he didn't go to Russia or be a communist to learn that. I mean, that was just kind of his way anyway. I mean, sort of, you notice he's always kind of the underdog, and he believes in equality and that sort of thing. And a lot of people believe that, but he sort of stood up for it. So then another thing I liked in one of the articles I read was that he had been exposed to the Communist Party at one time, but evidently it didn't take, because that's when it went ahead and said that there was no record anywhere that could be traced. And that's doing me a lot of good, because, and then his wife, we kept telling her about this coming up, and can you clear this? We'd say, Margie, because she lived with him all back during that time. And she just laughs about it, and she says, oh, it's nothing like you read. She said, there's really nothing to it at all, but said you just have to, said it'd just be hard to explain in later, but she did write back. And she said that Woody did have some material that was printed in a Russian paper, and she gave the name of it or something.
Is that the Daily Worker?
It could have been, but anyway.
Did you read Born to Win?
Part of it.
You and the whole family went, when your mother went to the hospital?
When our mother became ill and was taken to the hospital.
And that was in about early 30s, wasn't it? Or do you remember?
My mother died in 1929, and it was 4 years before that, so that'd be 25. I mean, 1925. God, yeah, it's going way back. Yeah. Well, anyway, and yes, because I was born in 22, and I was 3 years old. That makes it right. And she said, what was I going to tell you? Oh, how we went to Pampa.
Yeah.
Well, when they took my mother away, well, first of all, I was walking downtown one day, and I was a little 3 years old, and just running up and down the main street, and people came to where my father was working and says, Charlie, there's a little girl running around down the street, and we think it's your little girl. And sure enough, there I was, and he found me. And of course, my mother's condition was so then that she would go to the show and just go in and take me, and then I'd get out and run all around everywhere. See, and that's when she was sick. I mean, she just really was not doing things right, then.
Was she depressed, or was it? Do you think it was most of it her
Well, it was
It
this thing working. You see, it starts more or less as a mental thing first, and then it goes into physical. But when you get medication and are treated, the mental part or aspects, my father always said that she could still be with us had she gotten treatment, but he said you couldn't get her to go to a doctor. Back then they didn't, and they sort of hid this nervous thing from people then. So anyway, he came home and he grabbed up some of my stuff and just started packing them. And I believe he put me in the car and went back down to the theater and went in, and he told Mama, he says, I'm taking Mary Jo to Pampa. He had a sister out there. All right. Then the very next rattle out of the box, I remember my brother that's 5 years older than me came out to Pampa on a train. And I think that she had become sort of dangerous to leave him with and was doing some things, and he can tell you about those. He remembers. So then when they knew that something had to be done, and so Papa put George on the train, and he came to Pampa too. Well, then, years later, Roy and Papa and Woody stayed behind in Okina. And, but they broke up housekeeping. And Roy moved in with the Dills and people like that and rented from them. And Woody sort of just rambled around, and the first thing you know, he'd hitchhike to Pampa. And that's how he ended up in Pampa. I can't remember. He might have stayed longer than that because Papa left Okima first and came to Pampa about the time Woody did.
Well, have you been able to determine whether that chapter that mentions your father getting burned, was that the crime? Was that correct? Or proper?
My aunt told me, and that was Papa's sister. And my father would hold up for my mother to his dying day.
Yeah.
He never would let us ever blame her for a thing. And I admire him in that, and I've tried so hard. And he'd say, no, that's not right. But my aunt said, it was right. And he just won't give in to it.
Yeah.
He would never blame her for a thing. And but he did come to Pampa badly burned. And he said
that story in Bound for Glory.
He told a different story. Well, you see, my sister's death was the one that Woody told about that.
Yeah.
She sort of, I think that's where the suicide thing came out of. Instead of Papa, it was this older sister of mine. She was 15. And she told Mama if she kept her out of school or something, she was going to kill herself. And Papa tells it that this old kerosene stove blew up while she was filling it, and Woody tells it different. And even my oldest brother, Roy, I could never get him to really talk about it. It was just one of those real clouded things. But my aunt in Texas, I feel like that she would know because she was my daddy's closest sister, and since she ended up with the burden of the whole thing, I feel she knew because when Papa came, he was a bed patient, and she had to treat him for months before he could even get out of bed. He was so badly burned. And he said he was working on a car and got gasoline spilled on him and went to light up a cigarette, and it exploded and burned him all in here. And, of course, Woody didn't tell that version at all. And my aunt didn't either. She said that was in Mama's despondency over Clara. See, she felt responsible for Clara having been burned because she never got over that. My daddy didn't either, really. And then they said, I have all these pictures and all these albums and everything. God does.
Maybe I can get up to catch him.
Anyway, he has he had, well, I'm trying to say that he wouldn't ever admit. He defended Mama in every way. So I can't put a
Can't really
real
tell what
fair. That
actually
wouldn't be
happened.
fair to him. Because he was a pretty honest, straightforward person.
He seems to have been.
He was a great person, really. And you know, we went over to Okima one night and to do a program. And you'd have to know my daddy. He was the world's greatest optimist, you know. And he'd sort of been turn that off. You won't waste your tape. He'd been, I have to get it straight on that. You don't want to. Well, first of all, Woody had just hit rock. Of course, he was just this rambling hobo type anyway. And but he just was not a father and husband material type, and that's when he just hit rock bottom as far as Mary was concerned, and she divorced him, and they just didn't have anything to do with each other. And it was told to me that she married a second time, and even her husband adopted Woody's children, and they even went by another name growing up. And Woody knew where one of his daughters lived, and he went to visit her, and he was just in the same state. I'm sure he's come to my door a time or two, and they slammed the door in his face and wouldn't even let him in. And I never would forget that. And then it wasn't but just a little few months or a year that he began to sort of make big time, and he began to, his name sort of come to the front and got a little money. You'd just be surprised how they beat a path to his door for the money. Well, this son, he went to New York and wanted to know if he could go to college. Well, Margie set up this children's trust fund to educate her 3 children.
Yeah.
So then she said, well, after all, these other children are his too. I can't deny that. And she thought it would be nice to do something for them. Oh, she's the greatest. You just not. She is great. And so she said, Bill, you come to see us. I'm sure we can work something out. But they decided that he would pick the college, and they would mail the money directly and take care of all the bills and all the fees. You know, in other words, it wouldn't be, they'd be sure that he's getting his education, not just run out here just to get the money for something else. And I think he was killed in that wreck before that ever materialized. But it did go through, and he was to get his education that had already been arranged for. Well, the next thing that happened, the girls began to come and see Marjorie. And their marital situations were sort of upheaval too, and she realized that those girls needed money now, not years from now, from Woody's estate. And she made an agreement with them that she says, no, I'll give you, and I believe she's paying them $250 a month, both of them, for the next 10 years. And I believe it figures $30,000 each one. See? And that was their part, but they had to sign an agreement that they would make no further claims on Woody's money or estate. That was agreed. Now, I believe, as far as pulling me identical, now I'm just telling you this to kind of help you get just to get the record straight of how I feel toward the different wives, and so then I heard about Marjorie after you saw the picture where I said the girl from New York or California came to see me, my niece. That's the first time I'd seen her since she was 3 years old. And I was just a little girl at home then, and I just loved them. And you know, they never ever wrote, never tried to find me, never was any communication whatsoever. And finally, when I did get it, and I saw them, I let them know. I said, I was just a little girl, and you couldn't blame the family for things Woody did. And I said, there was many times I would have loved to have written you and had pictures from the kids or even seen it 30 years, but I said, you know, it kind of hurt me to think that she felt like, I mean, it just sort of that was the end of it as far as she was concerned with the Guthrie family.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he came back, and of course he was married to Marjorie all this time, well, she could overlook that, and they used to send them money to fly those little girls out to spend the summers with them at Coney Island.
That was Carolyn and...
Yes, Gwen and Gail, but their journey would alternate, so they could just each one look forward to it, you know, and they've had them all, and Marjorie just loved them.
Well,
And this last time she sent them the money to come, you know, to fly out to see her.
that's really something.
Yes, and then